Well, it's that time again for another episode of Cruising on the Edge, where there's real talk, real recovery, real purpose, and real results. I'm your host, Carol Cruz, and I am so grateful that you are all here. If this is your first time here and you're just navigating this space for the first time, you're in the right place. You know why? Because you matter, because everything matters. And I'm here with my friend, Tom Jackson from the Commonwealth of Virginia. We're going to put on a great conversation for everyone under the topic of discovery. We're also honoring Pride Month. So if you don't have some love in your life, I'll turn this around when I go to edit. If you need a little love in your life, hopefully Tom and I can spread a little love across your universe today. So
I sure
Tom,
hope
thank
so.
you. Welcome. Oh, also everybody, grab your favorite beverage, sit back, relax, maybe even get a notebook because this is not just about a conversation. This is about taking away some things that may be helpful in your life today. So
Yeah.
welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Carol. Greetings from the southern side of the edge. Um, and it's great to see you and talk to you. It's been a while, and it was great to get caught up and plan this, and I'm really looking forward to it. Um, I don't have any pride stuff behind me, unfortunately. It's on the other side of the wall. It's
You
hanging.
just started, right?
There's a
You just
windsock.
started.
There's a
Pride is
windsock
within
hanging.
here. It's all about
Yeah.
what's in here, right?
It is.
Awesome.
I was watching a great video this morning, um, of Bette Midler at the 4th Pride in 1973,
Okay.
and I thought, "Oh my god, do I feel old?" 'Cause I don't actually remember '73,
Mhm.
but probably the year or 2 after that is my earliest memories of stuff. I was thinking about this earlier, I w we've talked about this before. I grew up on the other end of Connecticut from where you are,
Right? In
and
Hartford, right?
we got
Hartford,
the we no,
Connecticut?
on the shore
Oh,
near New
okay.
London, and, we got the Hartford paper and we got the Times, um, and I don't remember Stonewall. I was 13, and the New York Times, of course, was so homophobic in those days, really all the way through the late '70s, really even early '80s for that matter, that, they probably gave it this much room. And then the anniversaries, and the first few prides, I doubt if they covered.
Hmm.
So I have really no recollection of it at all,
Yeah.
interestingly enough. But, probably about the 4th or 5th one is where I started going, "Oh, yeah. Not only that, I can relate to these people because I think they're me, and I think I'm them, and, if I didn't go to Pride until I got to San Francisco in '79. That was the first one I went to. Um, and it was so close to where I live, I couldn't have avoided it if I wanted to.
Right in your backyard, right?
Right
As
in
they
my yeah, it was kind of my side yard, but, um, and as somebody said, I can't remember who it was who said it, but, there's the old Oscar Wilde quote about, the love that dare not speak its name,
Mhm.
and our motto in the early days in San Francisco was, "Where the love that dare not speak its name won't shut up."
You gotta get loud and proud, right?
Yep,
And
yep.
that, that is, again, I'm a '60s kid. I know we're not too far in age and, uh, you know, um I had, my stepfather sister lived around the corner and, not far yeah, around the corner from where we lived in Lincoln Park, New Jersey. And again, my thing was, and I talked about this last month in regards to hiding parts of myself and isolating. And of course, I can't hide, the color of my skin. And this, uh aunt, that lived next, around the corner, I often would question who is the woman that lives with her. And they would always say, "Oh, that's her friend," you know? and I stayed o my parents went away for a weekend or something like that, and I stayed there, and, they put me in, one of the guest what was the guest bedroom, and so I was like, "Well, where is she gonna sleep?" And, 'cause I'm like,
Yeah.
9, 10 years
Yeah.
old
Mhm.
because, again, in the early late '60s, '70s, we didn't it was never introduced to us. It was never the conversation about, people gay, lesbian, trans, we used all the old negative terminologies back then, and, as I grew up, I still had this sense of curiosity, even in my own sexuality. I had a lot of that curiosity, and, because I did have attraction to same sex. I was always inspired. It wasn't just inspiration. I was, physically attracted to women. And I had also, unfortunately, on an event with a woman who was a babysitter that kind of took me to a whole nother level. Of course, I talked about it in therapy, but it definitely brought that sense of confusion. And so the first question I really want to throw down there uh, for you is, what was the emotional cost for you? Did you feel that you had to hide parts of yourself and your identity?
I grew up in New York, the middle of Manhattan, 5 or 6 blocks from the UN, diagonally across the street from where Sondheim lived, although, I never met him when I was a kid. My understanding was that when I was really little, Betty Davis used to shop at the same market we did, and she used to go, like goo goo gaga with me when I was in my stroller. So maybe that rubbed off. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was just thinking about this too. My when you mentioned aunt, my father's older sister and her partner were together for 43 years. They
Oh,
were literally in the nursing home together their last umpteen years. My aunt died. Well, and they were both my aunts. I mean, it was Aunt Alice and Aunt Joe, and they slept in twin beds in the same room and they were roommates. Um, and we had other friends. My parents had friends in New York. Their dinner parties kind of looked like the UN anyway, of sort of every ethnicity, color, shape you can think of when they had people over. And there were, there was a gay couple and a lesbian couple, but they were always roommates, friends, whatever. And when I came out, and I kind of did everything all at once. I moved to San Francisco, and I came out to everybody within like a week or two. But I needed that
how old were
distance. I
you at the time?
I was 23, I think. Yeah, 23 or 24. And I just came out to everybody all at once. And everybody was, why does it take so long? We're
It
sorry
was like,
that
"Oh, we always do. We were just
I,
waiting for you."
I got some of that, not as
Oh, okay.
not as much as I expected,
Mhm.
but some of that. But I gave my parents a lot of grief about about the fact that once they started telling, oh yeah, when you were really little, Aunt Alice was going to grad school in New York, and she'd come over with her girlfriends, and they'd be, you know. At the dinner table, and she'd have her arm around her shoulder and stuff like that. And I was like, do you know what a difference it would have made if you told me that?
Mm.
And they said, yeah, it was a different time, we just never thought about it. Yeah, it was the same kind of thing. And my aunt had a really good friend, lived across the street from Yale, who had a roommate, and his room basically looked like a storage closet, because of course it wasn't his room.
Mhm.
It was the storeroom. It was, but that was, and I don't think I actually ever met him. I know, because whenever we would go there for lunch or something, he would be off, right, doing things, running errands or whatever. And yeah, I gave, I said, I understand it was on the edge of a different time. And by the time I finally did it, my mother's only real comment was no grandchildren, because I think that was what she wanted more than anything else. And needless to say, if things had turned out differently, she might have had some. Who knows? But um, I don't think I'd make the greatest parent in the world, but I make a great fairy godfather,
A fairy
and I
I
make a
love
pretty
that.
good and I make a pretty good uncle. So
Yeah. And again, we know in recovery, we may not be connected to the family, our biological family. We are now connected to a family of choice. Like you are a family to me,
yep,
or my brother from another mother.
yep, yep.
You're you're who you are because again, we see things in a different way these days,
The,
and it
the,
makes us who we are, by not hiding those parts of ourselves, by
there's
being
there's
authentic.
there's two definitions of that. My earliest old drinking buddy who got sober first, about 5 or 6 years before I did, who unfortunately we lost to pancreatic cancer, who was a pretty famous lesbian lawyer. I'll tell you a funny story in a sec. But she called us her family of destination versus her family of origin. Um, and then Armistead Maupin, one of my favorite authors, has a book out about his logical family as opposed to his biological family.
Mm.
Funny story about Mary. She was being honored as the Bay Area lesbian lawyer of the year, and she asked me to come and sit at her table and so on. She had this brown paper bag with her, and I was like, "What the hell's in the brown paper bag?" And she said, "I'll tell you later." So she goes up to accept her award, and she says, "You really don't want to hear from me all that much, and I don't have a whole lot to say except thank you, but I want to help raise you some money." And so she pulls out this pair of size 13 sort of sky blue pumps and says, "These are pumps that lost 3 cases in front of Antonin Scalia." And she auctioned them off to the crowd. She got $3,000 for auctioning off her shoes that she argued 3 cases in the Supreme Court and of course, lost all three.
Oh my god, that is a funny story.
uh,
What just quickly before we move on, I was just thinking, and I shared this with someone the other day. It wasn't too long ago. Uh, my first I got married, I was married back in 1981. I was 18, still in high school. I got married before I graduated and walked across the stage to get my diploma. It wasn't because I was pregnant. It was because we were buying a house on the GA. He was a Marine that would had a
yep,
honorable discharge,
yep,
medical discharge.
yep.
And we wanted to buy this house. And back then, again, how those ads come up, like, back in the day, back in the '70s, yeah, we
Mhm.
got a house for, like,
Yeah,
$50,000,
yeah, yeah.
we thought, our mortgage of $500 a month was a lot
Yeah.
back then.
My parents bought the house in Connecticut. We moved in 1965.
Mhm,
And I mean, for a while, it was our summer house for a while, and then we got so tired of going back to New York on Sunday nights. My aunt at dinner one night said, "Why don't you just move here?"
mhm,
And the light bulb went off, and my father's job fell into place, and so we did.
yeah,
And it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, why, that was back in the day where it was probably 3% interest. I mean, they paid the house off. I mean, there were 20-year mortgages back then and stuff. And I won't tell you, I sold the house, of course, after my parents died, and I was astonished to find out what it's worth now. I'm not gonna tell you,
yeah,
but it was astonishing. But, it's funny, I was thinking about this the other day because, we know that what tanked, what tanked people's abilities to raise a family, buy a house, all of those things was when Reagan squashed the minimum wage in 1980.
mhm,
And, because the minimum wage was going like this, and then it's been essentially
sure,
underwater ever since.
yeah, yeah,
My father with some scholarships and jobs, put himself through 4 years of undergraduate school and then 5 years of grad school, getting a PhD at an Ivy League school, and he paid his way himself through school.
Mhm.
Now you end up $100,000 in debt.
Right.
And back then at, whatever, uh, I mean, the minimum wage was probably, 75 cents or a dollar or something like that. And he waited on tables and he had some odd jobs here and there and so on. He was able to do that. And people could buy houses. And now you can't, you know. Now if you go to school, you
Yeah,
graduate with
there's no
50 or
way my right
$60,000 in
now,
debt.
there's my son and, a family of 5 getting a house, and they're paying a rent that is more than what I paid in with a mortgage when I
Oh,
was doing
totally.
that. It's
Totally.
absolutely ridiculous, and you're not getting a whole lot of amenities. But what I was gonna add to that, when I got married back in 1981, I was gonna talk about my wedding dress, and when my mother was alive, she passed away in 1998, so this year it will be 28 years, since she's been gone, and she was a woman in long-term recovery, and she was very much loved through especially women and men here in Connecticut, but also, her recovery started in New Jersey, and she passed with, 24 years of, continual recovery from alcoholism.
Wow.
Wow. But what was funny, in my early recovery, I was probably a few months in, she was hanging out with this person, and she came to me and she said, "Would you mind if I gave away your wedding dress?" And I didn't even know she still had it. This was, again, now we're talking about Raymond was born, so I'm gonna say 1994, 1995. And I was like, "Yeah, who you wanna give it to?" And she said, Don't get upset, but I wanna give it to Harry." And I had met Harry maybe at a meeting here and there, and, Harry wasn't well, as far as I knew, Harry didn't disclose whether he was gay, but he liked to wear women's clothes.
Hmm.
Mhm. And I was like, first I was a little taken back, I wasn't upset or anything like that, and I was like, "Well, if Harry can get a little bit more luck out of that wedding dress, he might as well have it,"
Then you did, right, right.
and I started giving her bags of things that he could wear because I was a little bit bigger, as I started to gain that weight back, that freshman year weight back in the early recovery, right? And, I was kinda like, "Okay." I never, saw Harry after that because she was living in Shelton and I was in, Bridgeport at the time. But I was thought, wow, my mother was very open-minded. Of course, to have me, she, met with a black man and she, again, get went against all the rules, and she was an Aries too. So there was no rules. There was no ever a rule book. I'm gonna take these earrings out because they keep clicking on my earphones. They look cute, but I gotta take them off.
They do look cute.
Yeah. So, she always went against the norm, and I really feel like that I've discovered those parts of her that, I really treasure, having been finding my voice, especially on this platform on, Cruising on the Edge, finding my voice and platform through Mobilize Recovery, where we initially met,
Yep,
and we've done, tremendous amount of work. I'm looking forward to seeing you in December,
yep.
when we head out to, Las Vegas, yes, Vegas, for the conference and things like that. But you know what I wanted to go into a question, but did
Okay,
you
go
want
ahead.
something to add?
No, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead.
It's fine.
Okay. So, again, we come from a lot of labels, the stigma, and the work that you and I have done a lot around advocacy with recovery, also LGBTQ plus community. We had a connecting friend, Chantel, that I absolutely adored, was not too far from where you were. We all got to meet together several years ago. And sadly, she's no longer with us, but she also taught me so much about language and about, how to show up as an ally. you know, and you're doing so much work around the movement, not only the recovery movement, but also the LGBTQ community and also civil rights. Can you tell me a little bit more or tell our audience a
Yeah,
little bit more about the work that you've been doing over
yeah.
the
I mean,
years?
it's interesting. You mentioned your mother, and I'm getting some echo again, but my grandmother. Speaking of Connecticut, my grandmother marched for women's suffrage and for birth control in Connecticut
Okay.
in the 19 teens and 20s. She couldn't vote until she was 35. She was born in 1885. She couldn't vote till 1920. Okay. My parents did civil rights work in New York in the late 50s, early 60s. There was an organization that desegregated restaurants to begin with, and then also apartments in the middle of New York. I think I went to my first Vietnam War protest probably 1960, I don't know, 8, give or take. Worked for a Senate campaign in 1970 for a guy who sort of shattered the old Connecticut Democratic Party machine, lost the election, the general
Oh.
election, won the primary. And then through HIV/AIDS and so on. So, so my activism and my protesting goes pretty far back, and definitely I inherited it from my parents. One little side story: I was at an event at SAMHSA in February, so it was about 3 weeks, 4 weeks after the inauguration, and we were standing around in the lobby. And my parents lived in New York through the McCarthy years, and they talked about it a lot. And they said you were always careful who you were friends with. You didn't talk about your politics until you got to know somebody, and so on. And I felt the exact same thing standing in the lobby in SAMHSA. There was just that oppressive, be careful of what words you say to whom. And then I saw this last week or the week before. There are now 350 words you can't use in a grant application.
Oh, I saw
Um,
that when it first came out last
yeah,
year with this administration. I
yeah,
was working for in person at a clinic, outpatient clinic. But yeah, they can't. You can't even use women or black.
yeah, yeah. So I was thinking about, you mentioned Chantel. So,
Mhm.
it's funny because I have two connections to her. The first, of course, through Mobilize and Recovery Advocacy Project in Virginia, but then also she was a really important part of Ramsden Recovery at VCU in Richmond, and I was just there at their conference last week. Last week, I did a panel in the first afternoon on what we're calling mutual well-being. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a minute if you'd like. Um, but they had a lunch the second day, and it was honoring members of Ramsden Recovery who were no longer with us. And thank God I was sitting next to Jan Brown, who's a friend and another family member of ours, because I would have totally lost it otherwise. Of course, they had a picture of her,
Mhm.
and and so on. But then I was astonished at the number of people I knew from my Richmond recovery connections, who had gotten lost, who we've lost along the way. Some of whom I knew, and some of who I didn't. The son of somebody that I worked with 10 years ago, and so on. I mean, and then the scariest thing was they had a list of all the names, and
Okay.
they were in lowercase, and you couldn't quite tell there was a period or a comma between them, and it said Chantel Thomas Jackson. And um I don't remember who Thomas and Jackson were. Obviously, they were two different people, but I
Uh-huh.
thought, this is spooky. This was really spooky. And then they did a sobriety countdown, and I haven't been to one of those in decades. And fortunately, I looked at Jan and said, "Oh, good, you get to stand up before I do," because they did it backwards. They started at 40,
Okay.
and she's at 39 and I'm at 35, but then they did it by 5s, and so we got to stand up together, which was good. I didn't have to do it alone.
Uh,
Um, but yeah, I mean, it was, and it was weird because when we went to Chantel's memorial,
yeah.
and Ryan was there, Nathan was there, Joseph was there, um, Aaron was there, um, and then the whole VCU crowd that I knew was on the other side of the aisle, and it was so, it was so strange sort of knowing her from those 2 different worlds. Um, I cracked up
As
the
they
whole
say, it's
row.
small world, right?
Yeah, it is, and I cracked up the whole row because Nathan in particular, because the minister, it was at the MCC church, the minister who obviously didn't know her, and was doing the service said, "You're welcome to come up afterwards." And we
And
asked that,
we asked that,
you keep your
you keep your
shares
shares
to like
to like
2 or 3 minutes. I leaned over to Nathan and said, like she could never say anything in 2 or 3 minutes,
oh, no. When
and the
she
whole
was
row heard it.
stationed here in
Oh,
Vegas, and when we
the
went, and I saw some, pictures show up on our memory feed in regards to when we were in Elvis's, penthouse, or it was it a penthouse
Yep,
there, his, residency,
yep.
there in Las Vegas, and we were all there, and oh my gosh, that was amazing, but yes, those
The
pictures
picture
of her, seeing her on the big stage there, and I was like, yeah, this is," and when she was also in DC,
I
that was
have
the
a
last
I have
time
a
I saw her in
I
person.
have a recording of that. I
Ah,
recorded that.
you.
I
Oh, please share it with me when you get a
I have a
chance.
recording of that. But the
Yeah.
picture of her, I sent to the VCU folks, and as a matter of
Mhm.
fact, my copy of it is literally right on the other side of my laptop.
Okay.
I can't quite reach it, but of one of the yeah, because there were pictures of her on the, we're spread out like this
Mhm.
on Elvis's chaise lounge. There's pictures of
She was
me,
so nervous.
Aaron,
She was like,
and
you
her.
wouldn't have known it.
Yep.
You wouldn't have known it. That's all her boldness and her tenacity, again, I was so drawn to it when we were introduced by Aaron. 'Cause
Yep.
Aaron was her coach, her recovery coach, and it was during 2020 when we were all, you know, on the virtual end of, the first mobilized recovery, well, not
Yeah.
the first, we had a mobilized recovery on that platform,
Yeah, and
virtually.
I was on that.
Yeah, and I was also, that was when I launched, Ryan and I talked about launching the Inclusivity Caucus,
Yep.
and that was when, again, that was when that was launched, and Chantel, I was introduced to, like, "Oh, you need to talk to this person because they really help you." And Chantel was very, and this is what I loved about her. She didn't just jump into things. Like, she observed, she gathered information, she told you straight up and right in front, like, "This is what I'm gonna do," or I'm here to tap in, but, I'm not sure if I wanna get involved. And she never did become a member of the Inclusivity Caucus, but a lot of times when it was just her and I, even weeks before she had passed, her and I had gotten on a call, because she was looking at a position that we were both looking at, a position that she had just got hired for, I believe, with Unity
Mhm.
Recovery. And, I was just so happy for her because she was also just making a lot of changes. Had moved She moved
Yeah.
back, from, Pennsylvania back to Virginia, and I was like,
And then back to Pennsylvania again.
right, and then back to Pennsylvania to work, and I actually got the call, that morning, or the morning after, or the weekend after, and it
Yeah.
wasn't too long, after her birthday, I believe.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had gotten a call from Erin that she had passed, and I had a Reiki session that day with another friend, that had opened up a new studio in Bridgeport, and when I went to that Reiki session, she, without even telling this person, and then if anybody knows about Reiki, it's all about energy, right?
Yeah.
It's about
Mhm. Yep.
energy healing, energy movement.
Yeah.
If you've got energy stuck up in here in your chakra, your throat chakra, it's about moving that
Yep.
energy. and she felt it. The woman, she felt that, and then I disclosed that my friend I
Yeah.
had just found out my good friend, and, I wasn't able to make, that event, but they did televise well, not recorded it
They
or they
streamed
had
it,
it
yeah.
live, and, I remember sitting in my living room, the room was dark, and I just had the light of the screen, and the tears just fell,
Yep. Oh, yeah.
and, and anything I do and I step into, I kind of, I use her too as one of my, go-to word persons of wisdom, like, "Hey, Chantel, am I going down the right lane? Is this my lane? Should I stay out of here?" Yeah, I just she had such a force of energy, that was just infectious.
Well, and I think too, the other thing that kind of related to that was there 2 of the other VCU people, one of whom I did some just, phone support for around the same time, give or take, I guess. I can't remember the whole chronology. I can't remember anything before 2020 to 2025 is all feels like 1 week. Um, Somebody else we lost who was also part of Rams in Recovery, and then a third person, all 3 trans people, and within a matter of 8 to 10 months, one after the other. And 2 of them I knew very well, and the third one I knew some. I started going to that conference they do, I wanna say 2018 or 2019. I didn't go to the first one, but I started, at the second one, kind of the same way with Mobilize, which was the virtual one was my first one.
Right.
I missed Vegas by, I don't know, 5 or 6 months. I think I was reading Ryan's first book right around the time of the first one.
American Fix.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and it was the call to action at the end of the book that said, what we need is the equivalent of an ACT UP movement to really change things. And of course it was like, "Oh yeah, I've got my, I've got my, silence equals death shirt." It doesn't fit anymore, but,
I
it
neither.
was
This one
it was
barely
it was
fits.
a it was either a small or a medium,
Mm.
because it was still during my drug days,
I
and
got what
I
was
was
whatever was left.
I was a little thinner. Needless to say, I was a little thinner then. Um, but, uh, but that's what got me, you were asking about advocacy a little while ago. That's what brought me into Mobilize and to rap was that call to action in Ryan's book. It was like, okay, fine. I hadn't done much of anything politically oriented for a while. And that sort of, and I've been doing some EMDR and some therapy around the grief and loss um of living through all of HIV AIDS from literally day one. And but it was that call to action that got me back involved with something that I was able and ready to do something. And also, I'd been in recovery for quite a while by then, and one of the things that I forced myself to do in early recovery, I was terrified of public speaking. And so I don't know where I got the idea. It was in treatment in 1991, but I don't know where the idea came from. Of every meeting I went to for 6 or 8 months, I would introduce myself, even if I had absolutely nothing to say. And I'd say, "Hi, my name's Tom, da 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 da. And I don't have anything to say except I'm just practicing saying hello." And
That's a great practice.
just so that when I
Yeah.
really needed to be able to do it,
Mhm.
there wasn't a wall there. And 3 years later, I was doing IT presentations to, 500 Navy IT people in Hawaii when I was living there by then. And stuff,
Mhm.
and I was like, "Yeah, I'll stand up in front of 500 people these days." Like, "Yeah, piece of cake." 1,000, that might be pushing it. Um,
We discover
but
a whole lot of a whole lot another side of ourselves when we get
yes,
to that
yeah.
point. Yeah.
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 And it was, the only time I ever had any stage fright and something close to a panic attack was one time where I was presenting on something for somebody else who was sick. And
Uh-huh.
so I was presenting their stuff and I really didn't know it all that well. And I remember getting partway through it and all of a sudden I got that, cold sweat, shaking, and I was like, my brain was at the airport in 10 seconds. It was like, I'm up, I'm out the door, I'm never gonna see these people again, I'm quitting this job, and I'm gonna be at DFW in 15 seconds. And fortunately, the director of the program realized I was stumbling and jumped in, and then I was fine. I got to take a few deep breaths, but I really went out of my way to sort of practice that public speaking stuff. And now, with some other stuff too, I did a bunch of job coaching and so on, between jobs many years ago. I've got my 30-second pitch. I've got my 90-second pitch, for a couple of different topics. But that's training, it's some of the storytelling stuff that we've done.
Mhm.
It is the peer training that I do. I've been a Virginia certified peer trainer since 2018 or 19, and teaching people not to tell their stories. I go through this all the time. I'm not teaching people how to tell their stories because I'm teaching people how to tell little snippets of their stories.
Or use your
Um,
lived experience as a
yeah,
connection, as a conduit
yeah,
to help somebody build that rapport. That's what
right.
I remember it
But what
really
I tell people is if you're talking for more than 30 to 60 to 90 seconds, you're making it about you, not the peer you're
right,
supporting.
right.
And it's interesting because I think I told you, I started grad school going through ethics now. I did the first counseling course last semester, and there's this whole thing about, and it goes back and forth and the pendulum swings about self-disclosure for clinicians.
Mhm.
Um, and basically, the most successful therapists that I've worked with as colleagues and known are people who let everybody know they're in recovery. They don't give any details above and beyond that, but they
Right,
do that much, and it makes a huge difference in terms of, um, credibility with the people they're working with, especially since it was a short-term program. If I was doing a year's worth of therapy with somebody, well, that's a whole lot. Nobody should do a year's worth of therapy, but that's a whole separate thing. Uh,
well, you have
you know,
I always
as
believe, and this is something I even heard from somebody, they said, "If you have the same therapist for 10 years and nothing has changed, you need to change the therapist."
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I did some of the stuff I've been reading even says, a year. That yeah, because I mean therapy is about changing things, not hand holding.
Right,
Um and it doesn't mean that we don't sometimes stretch things out. I've had times where I was seeing somebody, I would see them frequently, and then we'd stretch it out. We'd check in once a month, just to kind of, I think we called it maintenance, I think,
uh
just to keep
just
the
to keep the
relationship
relationship going,
going
right?
so that if I really had a crisis, emailing them or picking up the phone and calling them wasn't a big deal because the relationship
Was already
was
there.
was was already there.
Mhm.
But sometimes it was a 20-minute, half an hour check-in every
Right,
month or two. And that was really valuable, to be able to do that. And I took advantage of it a couple of times. At first I thought, yeah, I don't know if I'll ever do this. And then, like 3 years later, it was like, "Yeah, I need somebody to talk to."
yeah.